Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch One, and thanks for logging on. Today we are looking at this Breitling Transocean Day and Date 43 millimeters in polished stainless steel. This watch represents an olive branch by the Solothurn manufacturer to the connoisseurs of its vintage references, to those who are enamored of the old school, mid-century Breitling, the classic references, the pre-Breitling for Bentley, the pre-oversized, the non-emergency, fairly unadorned, uncomplicated, and discreet timepieces that helped to make the company a standard of reference in the Swiss watch industry during the 40s, 50s, and 1960s. And you can see that this watch on my wrist, 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, wears with the presence of a modern timepiece in terms of its absolute size, but the proportions, the detail, the character are very much evocative of vintage references. And I'll get into exactly which inspirations kind of fuel this design in a moment, but I want to talk about fit. Now, 43 millimeters means that the watch is large. It's not oversized in any sense. I don't get the sense, as I do with the truly oversized watches, that the designers had to pare back the lugs to make it fit a normal wrist. You can see they have a lot of form. Visually and physically, they extend the case and they give it a lot of character, a lot of flow and taper that you get on vintage references. It sits nice and low on the wrist, being less than 13 millimeters thick. It sits even lower than that because it has a slightly cupped and cradled case back, so really no more than 11.5 millimeters above the wrist. And you can see, because the shallow slope of the bezel and the extreme curvature of the crystal really taper it back from the case flank, a sleeve gets a good head start running up and over this watch. So all but the absolute tightest, craziest confining dress cuffs are going to fit over this watch. It's a very versatile watch in that respect, and it wears similarly to those mid-century watches that were neither strictly formal nor strictly sports-oriented and could either wear in an active, vigorous activity type situation or be worn with, again, more formal dress-oriented attire. This watch has that kind of versatility. Now, stainless steel, it's got a good weight to it, but it's not heavy in any respect. And it has a beautiful rectangular scale brown alligator strap with a contrasting stitch and abundant bolstering, but it's not stiff. It has a nice flexibility to it and a very supple calfskin underside that's almost silky, almost has a buttery quality to it. Very high quality in every respect, top and bottom. You can see that the watch has a bolstering that really gets thick as it approaches the lugs, aesthetically pleasing. It also holds the watch in place nicely, but everything that touches the skin is beautifully made, and that includes the Breitling deployant steel clasp. And I want to show how this works because it eliminates the minders on the strap, and that's really one of the highlights of certain Breitling straps. Aesthetically, it's clean. It's also going to bode well for the longevity of the strap's appearance, because while alligator tends to be pretty hardy and wears well, those little strap minders, being spindly, thin, fairly fragile, are prone to aging faster than the straps themselves. So Breitling does away with them, and that pays dividends in the short run and the long. Now you can see, beautifully polished, beautifully detailed. This is a clasp that's up to the standard of the rest of the watch. And when you fit the strap and you buckle it into suit, you'll also note that there are no holes in the strap. So those aren't going to become gouged, those aren't going to become enlarged, dirty, they're not going to become ragged over time. So this setup is really well suited for long haul durability. But when you close it, the watch is now seamless. It's just one continuous flow of leather from lug to lug with no strap minders and no holes to break up the flow of the strap and the band-like effect that it gives visually. There is a beautiful contrasting stitch which I feel is wonderfully consonant with the vintage evocative mission of this watch. Now, the watch itself is inspired by two important 1950s families of watches in the Breitling catalog. Launched in 2007, the current Transocean line is really supposed to be a direct tribute to the 1958 Transocean, the first of the name in the Breitling catalog. It launched a sort of line of all-around formal/active watches. Again, neither the Super Ocean nor the extreme formal ultra-thin gold dress references. It was sort of in the middle of the spectrum. And this watch pays tribute to those. You can see the crosshair style dial, very evocative. The stick indices, you can see the blended lugs, very much in the form of the original. But what you also see is the day and the date combination, and that is a reference to, again, the 1950s era Breitling Datora watches like the 2528 reference that featured the day at 12 and the date at 3, a contemporary of the Rolex Day Date. It was the same type of idea with the same type of practicality, and that continues today. Now, what I like about the look of this watch is that Breitling didn't simply create a simulacrum of an old watch and enlarge it. They worked hard to give the watch elements that build character and definition throughout the case and really give this watch an extra element of visual punch and nuance that emerges the more attention you pay to its subtleties. For instance, you see the step between the edge of the lug and the junction with the case. It doesn't simply blend seamlessly into the flank of the case, but there is a defined step, a notch, a point of distinction, and a visual break that adds strength to the whole. You can see the lugs with this chamfer along the side. It adds another dimension. Between the flank and the hood there is that transitional area. And it's not just a straight chamfer all the way to the top, but it actually tapers from broad at the edge to very narrow where it abuts the case. You can see the bezel, very shallow but a separate element from the case, visually distinguished by this character line, this seam between them. And then you can see how in vintage style it's very, very shallow until it reaches a sapphire that has been consciously, deliberately designed to have this extra flare, curvature, and shoulder, this stack height above the bezel in the fashion of a vintage 1950 style plexiglass or acrylic crystal. So Breitling has taken the vintage theme to the nth degree, and they've turned the crystal into an evocative, historic styled element in its own right. I like it. It adds a lot of charm to the watch, and the reference is spot on. Anyone who loves vintage watches from this period is going to love this detail. I do, and it's the kind of thing you'll notice constantly, because when your watch is on your wrist, you're always looking at it at an oblique angle. It's the kind of thing that's lost in studio photos that are shot like this or like this, but from a human angle, the way you experience your watch, all of these elements, from the flank details of the case to the step of the bezel to the curvature of the crystal, they really come out. Now the dial itself, as I mentioned earlier, also features those vintage style elements, and primary among them are the general layout as well as the crosshair detailing across center. Now this is something that was popular on a number of references that were somewhere between the formal and the sports watch during the 1950s. We've seen it on the Jaeger-LeCoultre Geophysic as well as the reborn tribute to the Geophysic. It was featured on the original 1958 Breitling Transocean references. You also saw it on a number of Omegas of the period and watches from other brands, but it's a nice vintage piece that still nicely partitions the dial into quarters. Visually it works, aesthetically it's sharp. Again, it breaks up this mass which is very sparsely detailed, very spare, very well done, but would seem just a little bit exposed, just a little bit empty. Too much of a void without that sharp character line down the center. Like GM's style chief of the early 1960s, early 60s to early 70s, Bill Mitchell once said, a contemporary of the Transoceans of the time, he said that elegance isn't the suit, it's the crease in the suit, and that's very much true of the detailing on this watch from the dial to the case flanks. Now, high-quality elements are evident throughout. You can see the applied indices, the baton indices along the side, diamond polished. They shine beautifully, and they play differently at different angles because they are faceted. You can see the reflections changing as I move it through the light. Now, the frame around the day at 12 o'clock is an applied and polished element, very high quality, just above a beautiful applied gold Breitling B logo. So while the image is vintage, the quality, the fit, the standard of manufacture is very much contemporary. Now when I say this watch comes from a family that was known as sort of a in-between sports dress reference, that versatility continues in a practical sense here with the Transocean Day and Date. You can see the applied luminescent elements outboard of the individual stick indices. So this watch is quite legible at night. There is a thin strip of superluminova along each of the minute and hour hands, so it maintains its functionality, its utility, even in the dark. So in that respect, it sets itself apart from a conventional dress reference. Now another way in which it sets itself apart is its 100-meter 330-foot water resistance, and that's a key distinction because if you take the watch off this leather strap and put it on a textile or a rubber strap or the mesh bracelet that Breitling offers, you can take this in the pool, you can take it in shallow swimming, you could, fall in the water off a boat, no concern. Anything but extreme diving or very violent sport, you're good to go. The watch also offers a movement that's quite versatile, not just with the practical day and date indication, but shock resistant, very tough, automatic winding, 42-hour power reserve. It's a Breitling 45 caliber, so based on an ETA base caliber, it's nevertheless refined to a very high degree with Breitling's own standard of finish and COSC Swiss chronometer certification for outstanding precision. Breitling certifies all of its watches chronometers, whether mechanical or quartz, but this is the more romantic mechanical standard. And because Breitling uses the ETA base caliber, they also avail themselves of the chronometer standard ETA caliber hacking feature. When you pull the crown, it stops the balance, stops the seconds, and you can synchronize this Transocean day and date to an accurate reference time. This watch really has it all. Respects the classics, but at the same time you get that modern standard of finish, the eye for detail of the modern design house, rendering a luxury product with luxury materials. The refinement is outstanding, the size is contemporary, the look is timeless, and the content is through the roof. Check out this Breitling Transocean day and date in high-resolution images on our website, Watch You Want.